I need some traction.
Hey, Traction fam, super excited to bring on another community member. Alex has built one of the most successful SaaS events and communities, bringing together thousands of founders, investors, and operators every year. I spoke at SaaStock in, what was it, 2023 in Ireland, and now recently you've expanded to Austin as well. How big is your community?
Great to be here. First of all, thanks for having me. Good to see you again. We were recently in Austin together, which was a nice surprise. How big is the community? I guess like across, if we look at the events, we will welcome like across both events, roughly just 6,000 people across the US and the Europe event this year. And then holistically, we're doing stuff throughout the whole year. So it's probably around about 60, 70,000 people that are engaging, attending events. It's part of our communities and so on and so forth.
Awesome. So I'm super excited to have a fellow community member. And not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, we were together in Austin. So we hit the gym together and had a nice training session. And that's always fun. So today we're going to dive into Alex's journey from idea to execution, building SaaStock from a blog to a massive community. We're going to talk about the power of community-led growth and how you can apply these lessons to build a loyal audience that drives millions in revenue. So when did you first have the idea to start SaaStock? What was the origin story?
Yeah, good question. It wasn't like I came out the gate and said, I'm going to start SaaStock. So it evolved, but like within a short period of time. So I think we go back to 2014. I'd been working for a cloud computing software company since 2012 to 2014, actually rolled into 2015 was when I left them. But in 2014, I started to really get the itch to be an entrepreneur because actually I had all these ideas throughout my life, but never done anything with it. And I thought time was ticking. I think I just turned 30 at the time, so giving away my age now. And I wanted to do something. I wasn't really sure. What I did was I thought, look, for the work that I was doing and I was in sales, I thought maybe I should start a blog and become a trusted advisor to like my clients. And this might help me sell a little bit more. As I looked into that, I just quickly was like then going down a rabbit hole looking at SaaS blogs and sort of, I think, identifying at the time that you had your classic vendor blogs and your HubSpot and you're teaching you about inbound. And then you had your VCs that were also blogging, a few prominent VCs at the time. And I think very quickly I identified like, where is the community like blog? Where is the neutral voice? Where is somebody not trying to sell you something, all right, but actually just trying to add value? And with that, I quickly had an idea of, okay, let's create this blog rather than to help me sell products for the company that I was working for into a community-driven SaaS blog, which I called SaaScribe. And the barriers to entry were super low, setting up a blog on WordPress and getting my cousin to do the branding and shit like that. And then pretty much at the same time, I was like, okay, if I'm going to start a community-driven blog to help SaaS companies and founders grow their businesses, like, who am I to tell them how to do it? Because I've actually never done it before, right? So recognizing that weakness, I thought, look, I'll go into the editor role, and the guy with the idea of the editor, move into the editor role. I will write some content and just start getting used to writing, but I'll reach out to people who are at the coalface, right? Who are experts and specialists, whether it's in customer success or sales and so on and so forth, or founders themselves. And I did that. And actually the surprising thing, and maybe it shouldn't be surprising or it's not surprising now, is just about the positive response that I got from pretty much everybody to say, yes, they would create original content that I wasn't going to pay them for, right? So they were giving up their time to create content for my blog. But ultimately, it wasn't benefiting me at the time. It was benefiting the wider community. And they would get a benefit in kind because obviously if this worked, maybe they would get some business or recognition or whatever, so on and so forth. But very quickly, that turned into, I think like within 3 months, we were getting like 30,000 visitors a month, some of the posts doing really well. And I was just publishing it at quite a high cadence. I think like I was experimenting, but some weeks it was 5 times a week and even sending out 3 or 4 newsletters a week. And people would then give me good feedback, say, tone it down a little bit. You don't need to be doing 5 a week and so on and so forth. 3 months into it, as there was a bit of traction and good positive feedbacks and seemingly building what was then already a bit of a community and awareness, I then started the podcast, the SaaS Revolution Show, which I'm still doing 10 years later, and put myself outside my comfort zone again. And first guest was Mark Roberge, and I was really nervous like before that, because who am I to interview this guy who's built HubSpot into this machine and so on and so forth. So I had suffered from imposter syndrome for a long time. But again, nobody was doing B2B podcasts at the time. Nobody was doing the community like focused or driven blog. And that sort of took off. I didn't have a lot of competition, right? Nobody was doing it. Nobody was doing the podcast back then. If you fast forward to today, like much harder because everyone's doing a podcast. And that took off and I sustained that. I started doing local meetups. Again, nobody was doing meetups in the UK for SaaS founders. I did one, 120 people came from all across the UK and they were just so grateful. And you just got that feeling like when I was doing it, I felt like I was doing something quite simple. Picking a date, picking a venue, creating a page, getting some speakers, inviting them to come, having 120 people come together. But actually, there was a lot of value around that. And I think from that, I then had these 3 things. And I was putting a lot of time into that. I was also working my other job, but also spending probably more time doing this. And I was thinking like, I'm really enjoying this and I'm adding value and I'm connecting with people and this is getting me excited, but this is not a business because there's 0 revenue here and it's 8 months of my time and there's no revenue to show for this. So I was trying to figure out the path and I thought about advertising, but obviously in terms of, it's a niche audience, 30,000 views, like we weren't going to get a lot of money from that, some sponsorship, we did some RFPs, but this other avenue and people said, look, we really want a conference in Europe. Right? You seem to be the guy. And like, why don't you do a conference in Europe? And I've never run a conference before, right? But I see logically I'm building an audience here and the audience wants a conference and there isn't a conference in Europe for B2B SaaS founders and the community there. So actually this might make sense. And then naively, first time entrepreneur thinking it's going to be easier than people say it is. I said, okay, I'm going to build this conference. And I think because I had already been doing this blog, interviewing founders, making these connections, I then was able to go back to them and say, hey, look, I'm going to do this event. If I do this event, will you attend? Will you sponsor? And not everybody, but a lot of people like the CEO of ChartMogul, Nick Franklin, he said yes. He was my first ever customer, first ever sponsor. Literally as soon as I got the date and I published the website, we signed ChartMogul as our first gold sponsor. Very soon, Patrick Campbell, who was then CEO of Profitwell, picked up the phone. This is what we want. He's obviously a competitor back at the time with ChartMogul, and I want to sponsor. We closed that deal down. So all of a sudden, I found a channel which was going to be the revenue source for this business that I didn't know that I was like creating or hadn't intentionally set out to create. I'd like to say the rest is history. Obviously, there's 10 years of history there, but that was like the origin story. We became customer funded because I'd already built this audience, because I'd already built community inadvertently without realizing initially that I was doing it.
What was your definition of community back then when it first came together? Was it like people coming to the blog and then the same people showing up to the events on a cadence?
Yeah, no, it's a good question because I think before we actually had the physical event, like we had community, right? There were people commenting on the blogs, there were people emailing me, there were people responding to I don't know if we get this anymore, but we would get a lot of people respond to the newsletters, right? And I was interacting and engaging them. I think maybe what was missing at the time was the folks weren't interacting with each other, but they were interacting and engaging with me. But I felt that there was certainly audience building. Probably that first step then to get people connected together was doing the local meetup. So I did them London, I think I did Paris, Berlin, and Dublin. And actually what I also saw, and I remember this, some of the same people would go. We had this guy, Rory, who still comes to SaaStock events 10 years later. he was literally following me across Europe, like all the meetups. And there was another guy, Carlos from the Canary Islands. I'd see him in the Berlin meetup, and he'd flown over from the Canary Islands, but he'd be in the London meetup, and you could see that this is what people wanted. They wanted to connect together in person. I think back then those were the early signs of, hey, we're building community. We're seeing consistent people coming back to these events, and they're the ones that want me to put on the main conference. And thankfully, I've got gratitude that they did actually come to the main conference. And on the most part, they're still coming, unless some of them have sold their businesses since then or done other things. But I think within a 12-month period, like, we had built community. And then I was experimenting, like, with the online, like, how do I keep them connected? Was it Slack? We started with Slack initially, had some maybe like challenges around that, which is probably a whole other like conversation, but just keeping people engaged. And then we moved over to Facebook, and that wasn't quite well. But I think on the whole, our community it's the holistic sum of its parts. But we do get, like, at SaaStock events, that people are just coming to all of our events, both the Europe and the US ones, people that have been to all 8 European conferences, quite a few. And then we do dinners and local meetups still, and seeing the same faces, and they feel like old friends now.
That's fantastic. And that year was 2015?
So 2015 was when I started the blog and the podcast. September 2015 was when I launched the conference, but for September 2016. So I launched it a year out, and that was like super early. And then also, I would say, like, part of the maybe like for any business that's in their first year, a lot of it's about survival. And then I had 12 months to market and sell this event, being customer funded. And there were certainly periods of months where, like, we weren't getting any revenue. So was it like, how was I going to pay myself, and what was it going to look like? And then it was quite spiky from a revenue curve perspective. And if I look back, 12 months was probably too long, because I was just like hammering the hell out of marketing every day, but ultimately just throwing lots of shit at the wall, but for 12 months. And if I look back now, event marketing cycles, I think 6 months is certainly long enough. And a lot of people have even shifted probably to 3 months being long enough, as I think the sales cycles have become even shorter.
We started Traction in 2015, and it was very funny. We started with an in-person events first, and the podcast came after the pandemic. And it was initially, it was just rehashing the people who spoke the talks at the conference and the firesides. And then we started adding the interviews. But what's really interesting is it started as a challenge. I wanted to do an event. We used to do a lot of in-person meetups. And because my company Boast, we serve entrepreneurs, and we would bring them together and host in-person meetups. And one day, when you do meetups, you try to hack together free space at the co-working space always. And I never paid for any of those spaces. And one day, like 200 plus people showed up to the co-working space, and they kicked us out. They're like, you hijacked the aisles, you disrupted the space. And that evolved into the conference. And so I'm curious to know, what did your first conference look like? So how did you go from blogging to then selling tickets for the first conference? Yeah. What worked and what almost killed the idea?
Yeah. So if I look at, I think, like I mentioned, we launched the conference a year out, right? But I'd already been blogging and doing the podcast for 8 months prior, and doing, meetups and so on prior to that. With that, I think, as I mentioned, that enabled us from a sponsorship side to actually get the, sponsors and revenue in, which was then providing cash into the business and enabling me actually to then move full time. So part of the story was then just before I launched the conference, I left my full-time job to go into this full-time. And actually that was even pre-revenue, right? My partner was pregnant at the time, and I said to her, like, I'm going to leave my well-paying job. I'm going all in on this. This is what I want to do. She said to me, wait 2 years. We've had the baby, so on and so forth. And I'm sure many entrepreneurs have been in this position, because there's never a perfect time. But I was like, if I'm going to wait 2 years, it's just never going to happen. Somebody else is going to do it. We effectively had 6 months of runway in order to do this, so that I could survive and feed the family. And I think there's nothing like a good deadline and a bit of pressure there to make sure that I wasn't procrastinating, and so on and so forth, right? So the pressure was on. But I did close those early sponsorship deals, which then brought me further runway. And then in January of 2016, I went out to sell tickets to the market. And because I'd already built this audience up that were engaged, right? It was a small audience, right? But they were engaged and they were the ones who wanted the conference. I remember again, that first day of selling tickets, it was like 15K revenue, right? And just seeing them like flow in, and the people that I was meeting at the meetups buying the tickets. And it was such a great feeling. Then obviously the spike is over and you've got a kind of flat period. So just to share that, let's say, as I launched, because I had this warm, engaged audience, it really did help from the revenue side. To answer the question around what did the first conference look like? So after, let's say, 9 months of marketing the tickets, we got just under 700 people to Dublin. It was about 550 founders, about 100 VCs, and then we had the speakers. And it was really hard to do that. I'd actually looked and researched a bit, and like, first time conference, what is the perfect size? And you saw like the first web summit was 300 people. They're now 70,000. The first that, there were 300 people. So there seemed to be this commonality, like 300 for the first event. And I was like, I've got a year to do this, right? I'm going for 700, right? And I realized as we got closer to the event, like how difficult that was. Having said that, we just about did it, right? And when I say we, it was myself full-time. I had a guy, Chris Murphy, working with me like part-time. And then we hired like a full-time ops person, like a few months out. But effectively, I was doing pretty much all of the sales and marketing. And then maybe again, like the surprising thing, because the event is in Dublin, we thought about this as a European SaaS conference, but people flew in from Brazil, from India, from Australia, from all over, from the US. And they wanted that not only to like tap into the European market, but ultimately they wanted to get together with their peers. And there wasn't really many other opportunities to do that. And we were providing that at a different time of year for them, at a good time of year. And so this was like end of September. So what did it look like? It would look like an international global conference, global founders being there. And also I had overinvested in the look and feel of the event. So it looked really good. I spent a lot of time. You can imagine the pride a founder has. When you look good, better, best, you're veering towards, I want everything to be the best, right? That was actually something that worked for us, but also probably could have killed us, right? To answer one of your other questions, because what I didn't have was experience. What I didn't have was knowledge of running a event P&L. What I didn't have was knowledge of what things cost, etc. So I overinvested in the event. And actually, typically, most first-time events lose money. I didn't know this. I didn't have this information. And then typically year 2, you break even, and year 3, you earn a profit. It's commonplace, but not every time. And we lost about 60, 70,000 on that first event because I had invested in the look and feel, and some of the stage designs of that first event were some of the best we've ever had when I look back at it. And everybody said to me, or a lot of people said to me, it doesn't look like a first time conference. This looks too good to be a first time event, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was a lot of the feedback. But what that helped, because of the investment in that, and given that actually we didn't really have much competition, and there were high quality people there, and they had a good time and they got value, that kind of set me up for success. So whilst we had lost money, I was then able to do very quickly a strong rebook to get people signed up for the next year, both on sponsorships and tickets. And so that overinvestment really helped show that SaaStock stood apart from other events. Not necessarily, as I say, there wasn't any SaaS events in Europe at the time. So that was helpful. So it could have killed us, because I was like, certainly when the conference was happening, I was having a bit of anxiety knowing how much money that we had lost and thinking about, how am I going to pay for this? But then actually that also then gave that drive to say, now the conference is done and I've worked a full year on this, I'm not going to take a 2-week holiday. One, I can't afford it because I've lost a hell of a lot of money. But 2, I need to recoup the losses as the first thing. So I just went straight back into sales mode and doing the rebooking. And for the next 30 days, I then managed to book north of 100K in rebooking, for the following year, which then, helped us again. And as we continued and expanded.
Awesome. How much did you lose exactly on that first event?
It was about 60,000. And for me at the time, I was paying myself very little throughout that year. We'd lost money, and it was like, where am I going to get 60,000 from? For a fleeting moment. And then the answer was like, I need to sell. There's no guarantees. I need to sell more for the next year, enabling me to cover that, which I did.
Makes sense. Now, the name SaaStock is interesting. What does it mean, and how did you come up with it?
Sure, I'd love to give a creative story around this, but it just came to me so naturally. I think I was just like walking, getting some fresh air, and I was like, what am I going to call it? And SaaStock just popped into my head, and it just made me think, connecting the Woodstock of SaaS, I think, was the correlation. Whilst we've never gone out there with our marketing to say the Woodstock of SaaS, effectively that's how the name came together. It just popped into my head like super quickly.
You're a music festival fan.
I've certainly been a music fan throughout my life. I've been to a few festivals, and I've gone through all the genres of. When I was younger, I was into grunge, and then I was drum and bass, and then house music. And I do like music quite a bit, but I think certainly that was the influence. And even that first SaaStock, the look and feel and the designs were influenced by music, and specifically for that one, heavy metal. Yeah, there was a lot of that inspiration there.
I love that. I love that. For some reason, I thought SaaStock meant like SaaS stock,
No, yeah,
like stock. But I think you should be more deliberate in the Woodstock for SaaS. I think that's a pretty cool messaging. And you should continue to integrate like the heavy metal theme, right? Never mind you. Never mind them.
like the first couple of years, I think for the first 3 years we had a different theme, and so we did heavy metal in the first one. I think the next year we did like Berlin influenced techno, and so when you came into the conference, when you were registering for or collecting your ticket, it was like a nightclub in the registration area, and you had all these posters around everywhere. You had the DJ and so on and so forth. Now, probably as we've aimed to a little bit more like profitability being important for us as a business, you look at these things and say, oh, you spend 50K on the registration area versus actually just not having anything there and just people checking in. But I do feel like there's a balance, and we probably lost a little bit of that, what we had in the early days, and some of these Easter eggs and the kind of the wow moments as people come in. Some of that, I would say, has gone over time, and I'd love to bring that back. But when we do the internal meetings about the specific events, whether it's US or Europe, and when you're looking at the budget and the P&L, often these kind of nice to have things are the things that kind of get cut to ensure that we're staying within a certain profit margin. So yeah, just got to find that balance of how we can bring it back.
I think the first conference I hosted, it was called Cloud Factory, and we rebranded it to Traction, and it was a heavy metal theme. And it was, I think, never mind the bollocks, here comes the Cloud Factory. I don't think anyone listens to heavy metal. These as the generations have this changed.
Yeah.
I'm 45 this year, so it made sense 10 years ago, but probably not now.
Yeah.
In terms of any breaks, any things that almost kill the idea, and I'll tell you why. That first conference is always super memorable.
Yeah.
What happened with Cloud Factory was we end up changing names to Traction. There's a huge like Netflix saga around what happened there. But nonetheless, we said, okay, you know what? Maybe we'll not do another conference, my co-founders and I. And then it just was bothering me. I'm like, I have this big community. And there was so much chaos around the first conference, meaning we had a third partner who basically hijacked the accounts and locked me out, and announced a new conference and saying, this is the new Cloud Factory. Yeah. And it had to file an injunction. There's a bunch of craziness that went. And then finally we won, and I could get all the assets, which was mainly my community list that I had been locked out of the Twitter and everything. So like my other co-founder, Alex said, we were disheartened, didn't want to do another conference. And then I think in the January of 2015, I'm like, no, my heart says I want to do a conference. It's like, you're getting no budget. So I cold emailed like 200 unicorn speakers and asked them to come on, and then one confirms, and then it becomes a domino effect of unicorn born speakers. And then just hack together a website on Squarespace and put up the Eventbrite link and email the list, and we sold 50,000 tickets in the weekend. And so I'm like, okay, now we got to get a venue. Ray Walia, who runs Launch Academies, is the other co-founder in Traction, and his family used to run these Bollywood conferences or these Bollywood concerts, and we couldn't find a venue on short notice. So we converted an EDM hall into a conference venue. We had more speakers than we could jam, and the back room looked like trash, like a concert sort of speaker room or a musician's room, completely trash. The screen was these large, massive screens in EDM halls, which are pixelated. There's a disco ball, there's a stripper pole we had to hide. Nonetheless, there were so many speakers that we moved everyone to lightning talks, 15 minutes, 13 to 15 minutes. And to keep them on time, we put a smoke machine backstage, which was water-based. And every time a speaker was at time, we'd hit the smoke machine. It'd make this massive sound. Poof! The speaker gets startled, and the audience would start clapping, so they had no choice. Towards the end, I still remember TechCrunch was doing a fireside chat. And they go on stage, TechCrunch, Frederic from TechCrunch goes on stage, and within a few seconds, it starts smoking. And he's like, why is Lloyd releasing the smoke? We just came on stage. And what had happened was the smoke machine ran out of water, and the machine started sparking, and the drapes in the back caught fire. And they had to like pour water. That's how hacked together it was. But it looks like you had a good sort of like very proper upscale first conference experience. We actually made decent money, like probably 40% profit on that first conference. But what were like, there's always these little things that you don't take note of, and it breaks, right?
Yeah, do you know what? So I focused on the sales and marketing side of it. I was doing everything, right? Recruiting the speakers, setting the sponsors, creating the agenda, all of that. From the operations production side, we work with a third party, which we worked with for many years. And they just handled that, and they made it look really good. And they charged through the nose for it. So this is where I became unprofitable. If I had not worked with them, it may have been a different story, but they just took away that headache. And with that, I think like collectively that first event just worked. There was none of those sort of like stories, right? It just worked well. I can't really think of anything where it was like, oh shit, this show is on fire, or there's something in terms of fires having to be put out. It just felt like it was running. I didn't have to do anything apart from my opening remarks, and then just going to speak with the customers and walk around the conference show floor, but all at the same time of having this deep anxiety of, oh, where am I going to find 60K until the event was over? So it wasn't like I was super happy during that first event, but yeah, we made it work. So yeah, I think that's it really on that first one.
And you didn't raise any capital. For the most communities until now haven't been considered like venture scale or investable.
Yeah.
But did you raise any capital at all?
We did, but not VC money, because it's not a VC business, right? And actually, I didn't raise. So what happened was we delivered that first event. At that first event, I had a lot of people come up to me, some prominent VCs within the industry, attendees, founders, just loved it, giving great feedback, and said, look, they wanted to support, wanted to be involved. And I had no intention of raising any money. But I think as I was a solo founder, as I was bootstrapped, I did start to question and saying, okay, there were these offers, right? People want to come in and they want to invest. They want to angel invest. And would it be smart of me, somebody who's never been a founder before, to have maybe some more experienced people around me in my corner? And then additionally, a lot of those people were, I think, as I mentioned, prominent people within SaaS, right? So I then also thought this could also be beneficial, right? Because they have a network, right? And if they're on Team SaaStock, this could, be helpful. They could help recruit speakers, promote the event, so on and so forth. So I think 6 months after the first SaaStock conference, I decided to look into this, or more than look into this, and go back to those people that wanted to invest. And I raised like 300,000, which it's not a lot of money, but it was strategic money. And I'd like to say like it was the right decision. What I would say is I think because that, let's say some of the VCs that came on board on the cap table, they're running their VC funds. They have venture-backed businesses that they have to spend a lot of time on. So effectively, I was just sending investor updates, generally wouldn't get any responses. And often, but not always, I'd email them to help like promote the conference, but it didn't always happen. So I think my point is I really viewed it as strategic money. And the reason that I did it, have I ultimately seen that ROI from that? I'm not sure. And do I look at it now as, should I have given away whatever it was, like 10% of the business? I'd rather have that 10% back, probably, right, in terms of the value that's being received in exchange. No regrets. I wouldn't mind having that 10% back.
Definitely. Now, in the early days, maybe like 2015 through maybe the first couple of years, what's the one thing you got wrong that nearly derailed growth? Maybe one of the things I heard is you overspent and over-indexed on the look and finesse and hire this external firm that ended up costing you money. But was there anything else that derailed your growth?
The biggest thing was 2019. And what I did in 2019 was I decided that it was a good idea for SaaStock to run 5 conferences across the year in 5 different continents. And I wanted SaaStock to be the most global conference, SaaS conference out there. So not necessarily the biggest by one event, individual event size, but being the most pockets of the world. And I think what I didn't realize was that in order to do that, the hard work, the strain on the team, the lack of systems and processes within the business for that. And also, again, like the impacts on cash in the business. So whilst we grew from a revenue perspective that year, I was constantly, it felt like every other day, I was getting requests from our event operations team to pay an invoice for the Asia event, then pay an invoice for the Latin American event, and so on and so forth. And these were considerable invoices, and it sucks a lot of cash out of the business. And so I don't think, when I reflect on it, would I have done that again, or would I do it again? No. International expansion. So we have expanded internationally again, but just gone to one additional market, which is the US, which is the biggest market for SaaS. So yeah, like for me, that was probably the biggest thing over the last decade, where that decision to be the most global SaaS conferences, to run 5 conferences in 1 year, could have killed us.
5 conferences is ambitious. Did you end up doing them?
We did, but I think what happened was, like, so we did them. Did we do them really well? We tried, but if we look at the 5th one on the calendar, which was Australia in Sydney, we didn't really work on that one until after our European event in October finished. And you can imagine the team has done 4 conferences already in US, Latin America, Asia, Europe, and now they've got to do Australia. And so we really started, I would say, in earnest, the speaker recruitment in October for a December event, selling the sponsorship, selling the tickets. We were very short time frame. And then the pressure was on because we're late to get that done. So I think, if anything, you could say that we didn't do that justice. Now, the events themselves, okay, if I look at the Australia event, we had 300 SaaS founders there. And I felt they were like pretty good. And the SaaS founders that got there, they were very happy that we were there because nobody else was also doing that. But I think for all the efforts, and if you think about maybe the revenue generated from a conference of that size, the reward versus the effort that we put into it was probably not really worth it for the business. And it would probably actually made a lot more sense to double down on Europe, and Europe probably that it felt, if I look at it, like it felt like 2019 was a good European event. But imagine if we had all of our focus on that, right? It would have been even better, right? And so I think we were very split from time, and just the team were just like, yeah, pretty flat out and pretty drained. So that was tough. And what that also meant, like we came into 2020 then through having grown in 2019, and cash in the business was good, but 2019 wasn't a profitable year because of that global expansion. And then COVID literally just hit, right? Started creeping in February of 2020. So we went from okay, cash in the bank is good, revenue growth was good. We didn't have a profitable year. I just hired to expand, and we were going actually, we were going to continue, in 2020, we're doing 5 conferences, right? And just looking to make them bigger. And so not necessarily learning the lesson quite then, but then COVID happened, and all of a sudden all 5 were canceled, right? And we had to go fully virtual.
Did any of yours break, like any of those conferences completely fall apart?
No. Again, I want to say, like, we've never had that. Nothing's ever fallen apart. I would say, look, we've had good event ops people internally. Only like when it's showtime, the conference just seems to work really well. If I think about any anecdotes like over the years, let's say to where something didn't quite work, look, I remember on occasion, certainly one occasion where they start the build. If you look at the European event and you've been there, it's quite a scale, and they start the build a few days before. Now the doors open on Tuesday to the main event, and they're still building. And actually the doors opened and they're still building. And that was a little bit frustrating, as you can imagine. The folks that are doing the building, they're working in shifts, 24 hours a day. They're working throughout the night to get everything set up and set up all the booths and so on. And one of our big sponsors at the time, their booth wasn't ready, right? And they were not happy, and they shouted at us, right? And I can understand their competitor's booth was ready, but their booth wasn't ready. And so they were not very happy. And I think it took a few hours, like it wasn't maybe until midday that day that their booth was ready. So you can imagine being in their position, they weren't happy. But outside of that, and outside of occasionally speakers going missing, they're there, but then they've wandered off, right, into meetings when they're supposed to be on stage, and nobody's got their mobile number, and you're like trying to track them down. We've been pretty good, like touch wood, in terms of, and always getting good feedback as to the event runs smoothly, no issues, speakers handled well, sponsors handled well. So we've been okay. But obviously, like with COVID, which was out of our hands, then it was just like a full cancellation across the board, and we didn't come back in person for 2 years.
What did you do during COVID?
Yeah, good question. So I guess for a moment there was, I don't know if I'd call it panic, right? But I had a fleeting moment where I was like, we've had this growth business now for 4 years, and something that's out of my control is just going to kill the business. That's it. We could be done. And then I woke up the next day and I was like, not going to let that happen. What are we going to do? We have to pivot, right? And we have to figure out what to do. I think I had a war room meeting with my leadership team and wrote 7 ideas. I can't remember all 7, but the one that made the most sense was to do virtual events, right? Because what we knew best. And actually, I'm pretty confident we were one of the first, let's say, tech conferences or startup conferences to run a virtual event. And we ran that on Hopin it was in June of 2021. And I think a lot of the industry, like events industry, was looking on to see how this went. And again, like we chose a decision to invest in like production, and like from a virtual event perspective, we had the same event production partner that was working with us on our physical events, work with us on the virtual events. And to make everything look like as good as it could. What we did, that first event, I'm pretty sure it ran for almost, we wanted to be across time zones because it was online. We thought this would flatten the world a little bit, but obviously we've got all these different time zones across the world. So I think we started in the morning for the European audience. We saw the US audience coming online in the afternoon. And then for the audience in Asia, we just carried on until nighttime. So we were probably running from 9 in the morning until midnight for 2 days. So it wasn't quite a 24-hour event, but it pretty much felt like that. So it was a marathon event. And it seemed to go really well, but I think partly it went really well because at the time people weren't really being able to get connected, and we managed to do that. And I think partly because it was a novelty at that time, and I think the novelty of virtual events certainly wore off. Maybe 12 months later, people started to get a bit tired of them, and we found that second year of doing virtual events, I think we were getting tired of them. Our audience was getting tired of them. We looked at them almost as just like content engines, a really good opportunity to create a lot of content, but we were missing that ability to make the connections and really finding the value for the sponsors. I think that was one of the challenging things.
As you look forward now, right, what do you see the biggest unlock over the next few years of doing SaaStock? Because one of the key things you outlined is how do you take an audience to build a community? And when I was writing the book on community-led growth from grassroots to greatness, the one common theme I found is every obscure idea that eventually became a sustainable, enduring global phenomenon, from Christ to CrossFit, went through the same 4 stages. People listen to you or buy your product, you have an audience. When that audience comes together on a cadence, it becomes a community. But then here's the kicker: when the community starts to create impact for a purpose that's beyond your profit or your product, it becomes a movement. And then when that movement has undying faith in its purpose through sustained rituals over time, it becomes a cult or a religion. Audience, community, movement, religion. I think we covered the journey of going from that blog to building a community that meets regularly. As you look to the future, and with the technological shift, AI at its forefront heading into the autonomous future, how do you take SaaStock from now community to becoming a cult-like brand? What are some of the things you're looking to do?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? So I wouldn't say we're quite there yet at scale, right? For certain members of our community, I think we're at this kind of like cult-like brand, right? And so we have something there. And the question of how do we get there, right, is we've got to scale up those people. And I'll share how do we do that. We have something called the SaaSop Founder Membership, which is a peer-to-peer support organization for SaaS founders. We currently have 70 CEOs that are like part of that group, that they meet on a regular basis, like once a month. We provide online workshops to them. We do annual retreats for them. So the weekend after next, we're taking like half of that group out away for the weekend in Barcelona. And what we find is that we've got channels, WhatsApp groups, etc. for them. These folks are really connected and engaged with each other. They're getting a lot more value out of SaaStock than anybody else. And they're maybe throughout the year and at the conferences themselves, the most engaged folks, the most engaged. And again, they're starting to feel a little bit like family now, friends and family. And so we have something there, yet we need to do a better job at the go-to-market and scaling that up. And so if we can take that 70 and make it 1,000 and then make it 2,000 and make it 5,000, right? Then I think this is like part of that secret sauce and the objective is not to get this sort of cult-like status, but I guess from a business sense, these are going to be the most engaged, the stickiest people, the ones that choose SaaStock over other events for the most part, that spend the most with us, that are advocating for us, that are wearing the t-shirt. And I already see that with the group that we have, and it's just about growing that group. So I think that's one thing. And in why it's not quite there yet, I think in part because the conferences being the largest revenue generators with the size of the team that we've had and we have just gets a lot more focus, and that marketing motion for this other group to grow this group, we just haven't done that justice. And that's something that I really want to crack this year. I think secondarily, if we look at like the next 10 years, and obviously with the AI sort of like movement, or AI being here at the moment, and thinking about how that might like impact. So I think one of the things, and I hear and read this a lot, that in the world of AI, like meeting together in person, if everything is autonomous, right? And if you're dealing with agents, and if AI is writing your content and so on and so forth, just meeting together in person becomes more and more important because of that human interaction. And so what I'm reading is and hearing is that B2B events are going to become even more important, and the right ones over the next few years or during the AI era. So I think that's one thing. And I think also I've looked a lot like over the last sort of like year or so, how do we innovate with SaaStock? Where do we go? Where do we grow from this $6 million event to a $20 million to a $30 million event? And what I believe the answer is that we are going to become the best in the world at meetings, right? And creating the best meetings program in the SaaS events industry to connect people with the right people, so that they leave SaaStock having met 16 people that are going to add value to their business, and really just focus around and double down on that opportunity. So that's when you look at the makeup of the conference over the years, you have your content running, you have your expo running, you have meetings area running, everything all running at the same time. Sometimes a bit of overwhelm. We're working on the agenda and have worked on the agenda to shape that so that there isn't this overlap. And like when meetings are happening, when meetups happening, everybody's involved in meetup, and they're meeting the right people and getting the right connections, and looking at really scaling that up by having the largest, most valuable meetings program in the SaaS events industry. And I believe, and we've done some modeling, that this can really scale us up from a revenue perspective as a business, add the most value to our audience, and make us the number one B2B SaaS event globally.
Awesome. I truly believe that when the world goes buffet, you got to go Michelin star. So this is a good theme. So let's take, as we close this out, I want to take a few questions in rapid fire. So number one is, where do people start if they're starting to build a community?
Yeah, good question. Rapid fire. For me, it was creating content or just putting on that first meetup. And I think starting with something like that.
The value of cadence, or rather frequency or consistency. Like a lot of people, when they think community, think, I'm going to do a blog, I'm going to do a podcast, I'm going to go on Instagram. I think there's great value in doing one thing really well, nailing and scaling. If you had to recommend the one thing to do when you're starting a community, especially in B2B, what would that be?
I think today probably meetups, because I don't know, everybody's doing a podcast and most people just give up as well when they realize that it takes a while to grow the audience. But I think the meetups.
Definitely. You know what I like about the in-person, everyone went online, and I come back to that theme of when the world goes buffet, you got to go Michelin star. Everyone's going large, you got to go small. Everyone wants multi-stages, you want to optimize for meetings. Everyone is going online and podcasting, you got to be in person. There's great value in person, because anytime you incorporate more than two senses, we're sound and sight. But we built a greater connection when there's taste, touch, and smell, especially when we were working out. What's one piece of advice for founders building communities now to make it thrive, to build this thing that people want to keep coming back to over and over again?
It takes time, but you need to empower the community to almost feel like that they're running the community to get it to that point. But it takes time. So initially you have to engage and be the driving force until you've kind of stoked that fire and kind of hand it out over to them and empowered them.
Fantastic. Anything we didn't cover that you'd like to share on the way out?
Oh, I think all good. I think just like for me personally, like I've been doing this for 10 years. It's a long time. But actually, this 10-year milestone has really reinvigorated me to look at the next 10 years of SaaStock and the value that we can drive, the innovations in the product. So I'm super excited. And I think like in 10 years time, if I come back in the podcast in 10 years time, we'll be 10x the business and of 10x to the value, if not sooner than that.
Fantastic. Tell us in a minute or so, what conferences you have coming up and where are they?
Yeah, so SaaStock USA is May the 13th and 14th in Austin, Texas. So hopefully see you there, Lloyd. That'll be a great event. Some great speakers there like Matt Mullenweg from CEO of Automatic, Rahul Vora from Superhuman, Alina Vandenberg from Chili Piper, amongst some others. Looking at around about 1,500 SaaS founders and their C-suite teams to be at that event, to be there. And then October, I think 14th and 15th in Dublin, Ireland. There will be roughly 4,000 founders and their C-suite teams, and a whole bunch of investors and private equity will be there at that event. And both are two SaaS events that not to miss. And especially if you want to really connect with people and go through the best meetings program that's in the SaaS industry. So yeah, hopefully see you at both.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Alex. Have a good one.
Thanks, Lloyd. Appreciate it.
I need some traction.